Hello, welcome everyone to this live session of I Need Living Conversations. I am with Sacred Blue Heron Woman, who is in Indianola, Oklahoma. I'm Julian Catari from Jalapa, Veracruz. This is the 139th session that we have of these conversations. And we're going to be here an hour with you folks talking about what the banks don't want you to know. You certainly would guess there's something about that, but how much does this impact your life, and do you really want to know, and do you really want to do something about it? And what does knowing have to do with doing something about it, and what does doing something about it have to do with being free, being plentiful, being healthy, and a whole list of other things which we talk about in all of our other conversations. You're invited to check those out and get ready for this conversation about what the banks don't want you to know. So welcome everyone.
Yeah. So, number one, truth, that they don't want you to know that all money is debt.
Okay.
Debt
All money is
debt owed by them, not by us.
okay.
Debt owed by them.
Okay. So they're making us pay their bills.
Yes.
Okay.
And it has been in America specifically since the War of 1812 that it left America as an economic and financial colony of Great Britain in debt for the war.
Right.
We'll talk about how it is that they're in debt to us. So the Federal Reserve prints the money we have, and so let's say I wanted a loan of $10 in cash, paper money. So they print out $10, give me $10, but they want interest on it, 10%. So that means I got to repay them $11. But if I took out $10 in cash and all they print it was $10 in cash, there's no way I can ever repay the loan.
Right.
That's how they work.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So the paper money that we have is called Federal Reserve notes, and it simply represents the promised dollars of loan applicants. That's all.
Okay.
So number two myth that they don't want you to know is that 95% of money is nothing but digits in the computers created by the banks.
Right. There's nothing
but numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Number three, banks don't lend money, they create it. Number four, banks create the digits in the computers out of thin air by the process of credit creation.
Mm-hmm.
How do they do that? Based on us. They require us to take out loans, but we're going to get into it. So we think of banks as intermediaries between us and money.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the truth way back when people, when it first started, right? We talked about that in debt with Sumeria and all that, where people didn't want to carry around their gold or whatever, right? So then the bank became the intermediary. But since the Federal Reserve Act, that's not been the case. So since 1812, that's not been the case in any country, much less the U.S. So we also think of banks as deposit-taking institutions that lend money. That also is negated with the Federal Reserve Act of 1812, and we're going to talk about that. So the legal reality is that banks don't take deposits and banks don't lend money. So what do they do with your money when they when you make a deposit? We'll talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
At law, the word deposit is meaningless. The law courts and various judges have made it very clear that if you give your money to a bank, even though it's called a deposit, this money is simply a loan to the bank because banks borrow from the public.
Mm-hmm.
Banks don't lend money. At law, they are in the business of purchasing securities. So to make it simple, you go to a bank, you say, I want a loan. They give you the loan contract and an offer letter, and you sign. And note that you are the only one that ever signs.
Mm-hmm.
Everything, right? All 20 pages that they give you. So at law, you issued them a security, a promissory note, and the bank purchases that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So you say, I don't care about all that. I just want the money. The human at the bank will tell you, well, you'll find it in your account with us. Well, that's technically correct. But remember that what we call a deposit is simply the bank's record of its debt to the public. So now it also owes you the money for this security promissory note, and its record of the money it owes you is what you think you're getting as money, the loan, and that's all that it is. This is what's called double entry accounting. So the nice lady or man at the bank entered the amount of digits for the loan you just requested into your account that they made, a different account, right? Not your actual bank account. She or he is actually putting this in their ledger book as a liability because it's a record of their debt to you. And then he or she creates a new loan account that's entered into their ledger book as an asset, which they just credit themselves with that amount that you sold them a promissory note for. So they create their own funding. Said in another way, deposits. The customers lend money to the banks that become an asset to the bank. The bank creates an account payable showing how much the bank owes the customer. So that is your account with the bank. It's their every time your paycheck gets deposited in that, they're now adding that to their credit, right? Also, and they're also showing that your account is actually their record of the debt they owe you. Because they take up, right?
So it's almost like, let me see if I can kind of simplify it. It's almost like they just put digits on an account that money is not coming from anywhere. They have that permission. And so you get that, and then you start paying them, and so they actually start getting. Nobody gave them the initial funds for the initial loans, but then they receive the money you're paying them for the loan. That's how they create kind of like
with our promissory note, with our loan application as a promissory note. That's how they've tricked us. Right. It's a security that they purchase, and that's they put that down, and as that's our account with them, is their record of their debt to us. And so then when you spend that money, that should be zeroed out. It should be done. But no, it's not. So then they also create this other account that they put the same amount of digits in. Mirror, 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 right?
Okay,
so you just create it with our promissory note. We just create it double the amount, maybe even triple, because we have no clue how much and every single piece of paper you give a financial institution with your signature, if it's blank on the back, they'll turn it over and write a promissory note and create money, create credit out of that. So, so the account, your deposit account at a bank that you think is yours is really just a bookkeeping entry. That's all it is. So loan, the customer completes a bank loan application that's really just a promissory note. This promissory note has value since someone is promising to pay an amount in the future. The note becomes an asset on the bank's books, and at the same time, it's put on the liability side, creating your loan account. But note that they don't actually put it into your existing account. So, right, they create this new account, which then you get the bill from a whole different company. So like I bought my Ford truck from Riverside Ford. The loan was created there, but then I get the bills from Ford Motor Credit Corporation, which has nothing to do with Riverside Ford. And these companies, these corporations that we get the bills from are just clearinghouses that have purchased data, the data that shows that we did this. Right? And so the checks that we then write, or that we send the stub with our credit card information on it to make the payment, goes to the clearinghouse, and it sits in an account that they create. And at the end of 90 days, they're like, oh, look, it's free money. Right. So the reality is, again, that as soon as you spend that money, that account should go to zero because you loaned yourself that money. But the bank tells you it's your debt to them when it's actually their debt to you because they just created that money with your signature. It's crazy. Okay, so who controls the banks? Well, the Federal Reserve. And how is the Federal Reserve created? Well,
Federal Reserve is just a name. There's no federal to it.
Right. We're going to get into that.
Yeah.
On the night of November 22, 1910, a group of newspaper reporters watched a delegation of the nation's leading financiers leave the railroad station for a secret mission. The delegation left in a sealed railway car with the blinds drawn for an undisclosed destination. I won't go through the names on board because that's all unnecessary, but one, his name was Paul Warburg, a recent immigrant from Nazi Germany.
Okay.
Oh, Nazism hadn't even started yet, 1910. Well, it was starting. But so now we know that they went to Jekyll Island, Georgia, to a sport hunting club for private rich members only, and this club has now become a public park. But these financiers journeyed to Jekyll Island in secrecy to write the private banking and currency legislation that still governs us today. So at stake was the future control of the money and credit of the United States and every other country in the world. This meeting ensured that a central bank would be established in the United States, which would give the bankers everything they had ever wanted. The most technically proficient of them was Paul Warburg, and he drafted the entire plan, but he did so. There was another puppet master behind him, and we'll figure that out. We'll find that out. The first thing he told his colleagues was that they needed to avoid the name central bank because history had shown so far that Americans did not want a central bank. So for that reason, he decided upon the designation of the Federal Reserve System. This name would deceive us all into thinking that the Federal Reserve is not a central bank and that it's governed by the federal government, which is not an entity. Anyway, the plan was that the Federal Reserve System would be owned by private individuals who would profit from the ownership of shares, and as a bank of issue, it would control the nation's money and credit. The brilliant plan of Paul Warburg also had the central bank being controlled by Congress, but the directors were actually chosen by the bankers. So the Federal Reserve Board of Governors would be appointed by the president, but the real work of the board would be controlled by the Federal Advisory Council, meeting with the governors. The council would be chosen by the directors of the 12 Federal Reserve banks and would remain unknown to the public. The next part of the plan was to conceal the fact that the Federal Reserve System would be dominated by the masters of the New York money market. To further conceal all this, he proposed a system of 12 branch reserve banks located in different sections of the country, giving a further delusion of non-central banking. Warburg's plan deprived Congress of its sovereignty, and the systems of check and balances of power set up by Thomas Jefferson in the Constitution was now destroyed, and administrators of the system would control the nation's money and credit. A professor of economics at Columbia wrote, "It is known to very few how great is the indebtedness of the United States to Mr. Warburg. For it may be said without fear of contradiction that in its fundamental features, the Federal Reserve Act is the work of Mr. Warburg more than any other man in the country. The existence of a Federal Reserve Board creates in everything but in name a real central bank." And at the time Mr. Warburg wrote this act, back in 1910, the public debt of the United States was non-existent. There's none, no debt. And now it's past quadrillion dollars, right? Trillions of dollars. Digits. So by definition, a central bank is a banking system in which a single bank has a complete monopoly in the issue of money. A central bank is not a natural product of banking development. It is imposed from the outside or comes into being as a result of governmental favors. Congressman Charles Lindbergh said at the time, after the act got pushed through Congress, "Our financial system is a false one and a huge burden on the people. This act has established the most gigantic trust on earth." And we've already talked about the 3 trusts, right? This was all part of those 3 trusts created by the Vatican.
Mm-hmm.
So, and with the central bank, the creation of money was a bounty conferred upon the bankers by governments over which they had gained control, and they substituted corporation currency for the lawful money of the United States. And they've done so for every other country since 1975, especially with the Federal Reserve note being the worldwide currency to deal in oil with. And that's where BRICS is now threatening this. President Garfield, shortly before his assassination, declared that whoever controls the supply of currency would control the business and activities of the people. Thomas Jefferson had also warned that a central bank issuing the public currency was a greater menace to the liberties of people than a standing army. With the passing of the Federal Reserve Act and the Federal Reserve System, the first task of the system was to finance World War I. A central bank always imposes a tremendous burden on the nation for rearmament and defense in order to create inextinguishable debt, while simultaneously creating a military dictatorship and enslaving the people to pay interest on the debt which the bankers artificially created, which is really their debt to us, but they're charging us interest on it. Right? It's all freaking upside down and backwards and inside out. So if your country has an army, it's part of the Federal Reserve System.
Okay.
It's that simple. What's in the question to ask is, what is your most prominent bank in your country? The bank that's doing the best, you can bet, is a Federal Reserve Bank. So initially, the governors of the Federal Reserve System and the board had a term length of 8 years, but then Mr. Warburg got that changed to 10 so that he could take away the power of a president to change the personnel on board during a single term of office. That phrase, "take away the power of a president," is significant because now the presidents find themselves helpless to change the direction of the government because they do not have the power to change the composition of the Federal Reserve Board. So who runs our country? The Federal Reserve, not the president. They're just a puppet.
Right.
So anyone who gets worked up over the election is just foolish because they're just a puppet.
That's such a difficult thing to get to. That's such an elevation of the consciousness to just realize that.
Yeah. So the true mastermind of this plan, the master behind Paul Warburg, was the Baron Alfred Rothschild of London.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense.
The opposing people to the Federal Reserve Act said that this is an inflation bill, the only question being the extent of the inflation. Have we been undergoing inflation since 2020? We most certainly have. And again, by Congressman Charles Lindbergh, this act establishes the most gigantic trust on earth, and when the president signs this bill, the invisible government by the monetary power will be legalized. Let's say that again. The invisible government by the monetary power. And it's all fiction. It's all digits in a computer. That's all it is. This monetary power. All it is. And we worship it. The unprecedented speed with which the Federal Reserve Act had been passed by Congress during what became known as the Christmas Massacre took Woodrow Wilson by surprise. He was not expecting it to come up for vote till after Christmas, and so he refused to sign it. However, he got coerced into signing it because he was just their puppet. And so Woodrow Wilson signed the Federal Reserve Act on December 23, 1913. So history has proven on that day the Constitution ceased to be the governing covenant of the American people, and our liberties were handed over to a group of international bankers, more specifically the Rothschild House of London and the Rockefellers.
Okay.
And it's the same with every other country. Not the same year, but right, the 10-year terms of office by the members of the board were lengthened by the Banking Act of 1935 to 14 years, which meant that these directors not elected by the people held office longer than 3 presidents, and they are in complete control of the policy making of any political party.
Mm-hmm.
The shareholders of the Federal Reserve banks are the people who have controlled our political and economic fate since 1914. They are the Rothschilds of Europe, the Lazard Frères of France, the Kuhn-Loeb Company, Warburg Company, Lehman Brothers, Goldman Sachs, the Rockefeller family, and the J.P. Morgan interests.
Mm-hmm.
With the setting up of the 12 Federal Reserve banks, the 12 financial districts, the traditional division of the United States into the 48 states was overthrown, and we entered the era of regionalism. So all our state governments are just kind of bullshit too. From the very outset, the Federal Reserve operations have been paper issued against paper. That bookkeeping entries comprise the only values that have ever changed hands, bookkeeping entries. Right. The 1910 plot to seize control of the money and credit of the people of the US was planned by men who already controlled most of the country's resources, and they were answerable to the financial power of England, centered in the London branch of the House of Rothschild. The fact is that in 1910, the United States was, for all practical purposes, being ruled from England, and it still is today. The largest bank holding companies are firmly in the hands of other banking houses, all of which have branches in London. That's what I'm saying. For anybody interested, check your most stable bank in your country and do some research, and you'll find it's tied to London.
Mm-hmm.
The bankers are interested solely in money and power. The initial meeting of these planners took place in Meyer Amschel Bauer's goldsmith shop in Frankfurt in 1773. Bauer adopted the name of Rothschild or Rothschild or Red Shield from the red shield that he hung on his door to advertise his business. And this is actually still the official coat of arms of Frankfurt, Germany. He was only 30 years old when he invited 12 other wealthy and influential men to meet him in Frankfurt. His purpose was to convince them that if they agreed to pool their resources, they could then finance and control the world revolutionary movement to win ultimate control of the wealth, natural resources, and manpower of the entire world.
Mm-hmm.
So political freedom is an idea, not a fact. And that's what he said. That's what Meyer Amschel Bauer said, who became Rothschild. So anyone the bankers put in power repays them by convincing the treasury of the country to borrow money from the bankers. Then they are permitted to consolidate the national debt created by the loan and to secure payments of interest and principal by taxation of the people. So the Federal Reserve banks, all banks and loan companies, create money out of our signatures, out of our loan requests. That's why we get pushed to make loan, to take out credit cards, right? That's how they create money. So and it's a bookkeeping operation then, which creates the money by entering a notation that it has lent to you $1,000, money which did not exist until the bank bought your loan papers, promissory note, and made the entry. John Jacob Astor, who was against the central bank and killed on the Titanic, was actually in league with the bankers as he incited Indians to attack and kill settlers along the frontier, for which he received a handsome reward of the opium trade. So he incited, yeah, he incited Indians to attack and kill settlers, right? And we've been taught in history that they just did this voluntarily. The same thing is the scalping. The Indians never scalped anybody until white men came and did it, and white men came and took the scalp and took them back to Europe and told them that the savages did that.
Okay.
Yeah. So we've got to get to the real history.
Yeah, that's bold words for bold. Let's highlight that. We have to get to the real history. Yeah.
So the controls over the Federal Reserve System decisions has founded another unique situation. Each day, representatives of 4 other London banking firms meet in the Rothschild offices to fix the price of gold and silver for the day. Despite the huge tide of paper pyramid currency and notes which are now flooding the world, at some point, every credit extension must return to be based on some deposit of gold in some bank somewhere in the world. Because of this factor, the London merchant bankers, with their power to set the price of gold each day, become the final arbiters of the volume of money and the price of money in those countries that must bow to their power. No historian has a reasonable explanation of how World War I started, and I do believe the same can be said of every war thereafter. But with the entry of the U.S. into the war, the newly created U.S. Food Administration became controlled now by London, and so London has controlled all the food in the U.S. and other countries through its sugar and grain czars since. On to World War II, the bankers realized that if Hitler did not become the Chancellor of Germany, there was little likelihood of getting a second World War going, and they wanted the war because it would double their profits. Their sole purpose of World War II was to be able to sell oil to both sides of the conflict and double their profits. In every war, we are driven to make war on someone else with whom we have no political or economic quarrel. Think about that. Right? The bankers finance a host of peace organizations around each war that work to get the people out of the country, or the people of the country, involved in the war. One ancient writer claimed that he had never seen any peace movement which did not end in war. So every peace movement of the century has been followed by war, because there is no profit in peace.
That's it.
The bankers had been waiting since 1887 for the U.S. to enact a central bank plan so they could finance European wars among nations which they had already bankrupted with armament and defense programs. So the most demanding function of the central bank mechanism is war finance, and all wars are economic in their origin because peace is not a profitable business and neither is healthy well-being. Kuhn, Loeb and Company owned the Mexican National Railway System, and they incited the Mexican Revolution. So again, from Congressman Charles Lindbergh, the Federal Reserve Board conspired to obtain currency legislation in the interest of big business, and to administer such a law would create industrial slaves of the masses. Section 4 of the 14th Amendment changed our status to subjects of the corporate United States through contracts via Social Security, driver's licenses, birth certificates, tax forms, and more. Cloaked as security and freedom, the amendment entrapped us in debt and servitude to their agenda. Slave labor is the greatest capitalistic investment. So I would dare say that to any person, check your Constitution. There's going to be something in there that does the same thing. So for instance, in 1933, one of the bankers gave a $415,000 bribe to Juan Leguía, the son of the president of Peru, in order to get Peru to accept a loan. And that is what's called an economic hitman. And that's what they do. They go in and destabilize, they offer loans, and then next thing you know, we're occupying them.
Wow.
So Paul Warburg himself said the Federal Reserve is a fount of credit, not capital. This is one of the most revealing statements ever made about the Federal Reserve System. It means that the system will never add anything of value because it is organized to produce credit, to create money for credit, money, and speculations. So Federal Reserve notes are US dollars, are paper loaned at interest. And one of the governors of the Federal Reserve Board stated that debt is the basis for the creation of money. The same governor said on September 30, 1940, if there were no debts in our money system, there would be no money.
Mm-hmm.
The trick in the Federal Reserve notes, the US dollar, is that the Federal Reserve banks lose no cash when they pay out this currency to member banks. Federal Reserve notes are not redeemable in anything but themselves, so the dollar represents a $1 debt of the Federal Reserve to us. The Federal Reserve created money is not used only for financial matters. This money is also used to maintain the bankers' control of every aspect of political, economic, and social life. It is used to bankroll the enormous expenditures of political candidates, the swollen budgets of universities, and the think tanks and other instruments of mind control. Now, here's one of the most interesting, the most powerful statements that we have got to let sink in. Few Americans know that almost every development in psychology in the United States in the past 75 to 100 years and longer has been directed by the Bureau of Psychological Warfare of the Army. It is known better as the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations here in the U.S.
Wow, the Bureau of Psychological Warfare, that exists.
Yes.
Okay, can you repeat what it's called?
That's the British version. The American version is Special Operations, Special Warfare Operations, something like that.
Okay, special, okay.
Yeah. So every development in psychology, every psychologist is working for.
And everybody, I was coming to the conclusion that there's no single scientific discovery that does not get sent to those institutions and used as a weapon.
Exactly. Yeah. 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 So in 1912, a Midwestern attorney named Alfred Crozier wrote a book titled U.S. Money versus Corporation Currency. And he wrote that with the Federal Reserve Act, we shall have only corporate currency and the government of the corporations, by the corporations, and for the corporations. So a soulless corporate republic. Let's say this again. Every single government is a corporate for the corporations, by the corporations, with the corporations. The exact opposite of what we're doing. This is why we have to. This is why we're doing what we're doing with Aloha Aini Dao Living, crafting our own new self-governance system, which is a system created by the people, for the people, and with the people.
Mm-hmm.
But the Federal Reserve Act took what we thought government was by the people, for the people. No, they took it to by the corporations, is government of corporations, by the corporations, for the corporations.
Mm-hmm.
So this corporate money rules our lives. We spend our days trying to accumulate enough of it to get to this mythical retirement age that never comes. We toil under the hot sun for it, risking life and limb for it, selling our bodies for it. Have we had enough of this nonsense?
Mm-hmm.
I know I have. And again, we must remember that there is no honor in paying debt, because as we have shown here, all debt is owed to the US by the banks. And yet they have spent the last 211 years and more telling us otherwise and giving us this morality that makes us pay their debt for them gladly. So it's time for us to walk away from this system and create something different so that we can dissolve this debt myth.
Mhm.
And that's what I've got for tonight.
Wow. So why did we go into this, the banks? Because we were coming from the some other subjects about health and
Right, because it's I'm always contemplating what needs to be, because we get, as we are on this path of creating a new form of self-governance that is by us, for us, with us, we've got to come from a different mindset. We've got to come from a different level of mind. So we've got to know what's going on right now so we don't repeat it. And so I'm always looking to what is the truth of what's going on right now. And we need to expose that, and we need to understand. And so for, as I told you in voice text, we need to understand spiritual gurus are the world over are saying money is just energy and there's plenty of it. No, absolutely not. Money is a tool. Money is a tool created by the Federal Reserve Act, and there's not plenty of it.
Right, and let's highlight that. One day, or at one point, some philosopher called this the theology of prosperity, where there's this spiritual belief that if you're good and that if you follow the laws of God or the laws of man or whatever, you're gonna be. If you pray, if you do your rituals of abundance, and the money's going to come to you, that's what you need to do. And all gurus fall into that, like you're saying.
Well, and it will come, but here's their other myth, is that, you've got to charge enormous amounts for your, like $300 to $900 an hour. $10,000 for your services, $20,000 for your services, right? Because that's what you're worth. If you don't start increasing your prices, you're telling people you're not worth anything. Well, bullshit.
Yeah, and so you've exposed then that there's another type of economy. There's a gift economy, and this is a whole dojo. This is a whole school of knowledge that is being analyzed by us, and anybody here is welcome to be part of that. And I believe we're really getting ahead of this information. We're really understanding it, and that's what the purpose of this video is. This video is a very precise, concise title, piece of information. Here you can come and research it and listen to it. What this crucial pieces of information for economic sovereignty. And economic sovereignty is a crucial pillar of other pillars, and you mentioned it, health and wellness. We're also tricked in many ways through that, and until you have all those pillars, you cannot have a sovereign structure of real freedom and of real wellness and of real sovereignty. So that's what this is all about, right?
Yeah, and on that note, one of the Rockefellers created the American Medical Association. He created a cancer cure that was petroleum based, and he went around selling it. No medical, nothing, no medical knowledge, nothing. He went around, this was, way back in the early 1900s. Around that time, and went around selling this to people. People would take it and get really ill, and he was run out of town after town, but yet he created what is now known as the American Medical Association, the American Heart Association, the American Cancer Society. All of those corporations were created by the Rockefeller for what purpose? For the sole purpose of selling pharmaceuticals that are all have a petroleum base. Every single last one of them. Penicillin has a petroleum base.
Yeah, and that's how they control not just the system, but your mind, whoever mind is out there, whoever is out there. There's a little piece of your mind that is still kind of influenced by these associations. I mean, we used to respect them. We used to believe that they were actual scientists doing good things and revealing truths. But as we come into the details, which is this is what you're watching here. This are the details. This is the information. Then you're revealed all the details of how that is not true, how that's not real science, how money's not real money, etc., etc. And then thus we need to, are we going to stay there? Are we going to just bend over? Or are we going to stand up?
Right. And walk away. Stand
walk
up
away.
And say no more and walk away.
And walk away from, and walk away into a more complete state of being, into more happiness, more plenitude, more health, more
pleasure, more love,
wellness. Yeah, more and more, and also more economy, also better life, better food, more leisure time, more and more and more of all the good things that anybody could ever want. So
that we spend hours toiling under the hot sun for.
Yeah. So it's turning the right way, what's upside down and inside out. We have to.
Oh, everything is upside down, inside out. Everything. Right. I mean, you know, David Icke said that, and I believed him just because you can see it's freaking true. But the more you get into the dogma that's taught, you see it all over. Everything is freaking upside down. Everything, and they've convinced us that it's not.
Mm-hmm. Well, so we're going to touch another subject that is crucial for this becoming whole again, becoming straight, or being not inside out and being free again. So what would be the next conversation for next week?
Mindfulness and the honeymoon effect.
Oh, so we're going to go into love, relationships again, which is this is a new dojo, a new section, or part of the wellness, I guess, dojo.
It's kind of hard to ping it into any single. It's a kind of an encompassing piece for all of the dojos, because I mean, we all.
But it's something that we cannot leave untouched. Right. But it's something that we cannot leave untouched.
Exactly.
Where some people would rather, I want everything else, but don't touch my mind regarding my sexuality, please. Don't let me go into that.
We're gonna do a whole other section on that. This isn't so much about sexuality; it's about our subconscious versus our conscious mind, and how we can actually craft our future so that we all constantly live in a state of the honeymoon effect. And
okay.
Right.
All right.
Right. We'll go into the myth of monogamy after this too.
Okay. That's something that's we're waiting, that is put there in the dojos, that is being worked, analyzed, written, and translated. So can you spell out the title again?
Mindfulness and the honeymoon effect.
Mindfulness and the honeymoon effect, for next week, 7:45 Mexico time, 8:45 Central Standard Time in the US. And so we'll be here live, and it's here recorded mainly on Rumble. And we thank all of our viewers and everyone invite them to be part of this investigation and this community, this creating this community, this rising community that is being born of people that are really understanding how to be free and how to get there, how to achieve freedom where it's all or nothing.
Yeah.
It's all or, you got to get there or we're not getting anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
So amazing. So anything else? Should I close the live show?
Yeah, let's close the live stream.
All right. See you folks next time, next week.